I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar and thank you so much for being with us today. In just a few minutes, Dr. Ariana is going to take us through the session. It's going to be really exciting as we're going to review cybersecurity standards and try to identify what are the best practices that each of these standards emphasize. And the most important part is how we are going to try and maximize our returns on investment when organizations try and actually implement these best practices, or what we call key control areas. So like I said, thank you so much. And without further ado, I'm just going to pass it on to Dr. Ariana.
Thank you, Praveen. So good afternoon, everyone. Like Praveen already said, my name is Ariana Terkulja, and I'm very happy to welcome you to today's webinar. As you know, the objective of this webinar is to define how to maximize security returns from implementation of information or cybersecurity standards. So we have planned the following agenda for you. So first, we will start with the fundamental and understanding of cybersecurity and information security standards, and then explore some of the key controls areas that are common areas standards as a whole. So in this section, we will explore how best to implement these controls areas and derive, let's say, maximum benefit and maximum return of investment from the investment made. So in the section number 3, we will introduce you to ngram micro cybersecurity services and our portfolio. So on the end, we will have a quick update on the activities of the ngram micro cybersecurity team before we will open the floor up for the question. So let's proceed. Okay. Fine. So let's proceed with the first section called Basics of Security Standards. Okay, so I'm very sure that everyone today in audience, they are familiar with the role that standards plays generally in security management program. So many organizations, in fact, build and maintain their entire security framework on popular standards such as ISO 27001, ISO 27002, NIST cybersecurity framework, and etc. So with this in mind, let me introduce you to let's say, basics of security standard itself. So what actually security standard means? So there are multiple definitions that are available today, but generic definition is that standards is a document that provides some sort of guidance on design, use, or performance of tangible or intangible entities such as product, processes, people, and etc. So as you can see, this is very generic and very generic definitions, and it's from ISO standard, that is one of the most popular trusted standards development organization in the world. So it's also interesting to see how standard is created. So we will have, let's say, consensus process that is deployed, where subject matter experts from the relevant domains are consulted. Upon eventual consensus is pursued upon the contents and approach and requirements of the standard. So many security standards, including, for example, PCI DSS, rely upon this approach. So in fact, this mentioned standard, PCI DSS, conducts annual community meetings wherein feedback is sought from the community at large. So we will have PCI auditors or acquirers and etc. So the feedback points are considered in making updates, in making revisions to PCI DSS standard. So also standard has to be approved by a recognized body. So it's section 2 on this slide. So on the international level, we know that organizations such as ISO or NIST, for the people who are not familiar with NIST, it's mean federal agency within United States Department of Commerce. and the PCI Council are some good examples. So further, we have other standards like IDMA, that is for Arab League nations in the region. We have the European Committee for Standardization, which is responsible for developing public standards in European Union. We have PACS for the APAC region. So on national level, as you can see here, the point number 3, we will have NISA, that will be in UAE, IDZIC that will be in UAE, and SAMA framework that will be in KSA. So now the question is, what are the different types actually of security standards? So on this slide, under section number 3, we can see the standards. They can be mandatory or voluntary. So what that actually means. So as we know, NISA, for example, NISA is mandatory standard for government entities in the UAE. So from the other side, we have also SAMA, that is cybersecurity framework for KSA, for financial, for example, financial sector. From the other side, we will have standards that can be voluntary. So a good example of that one will be ISO 27001 or implementation of the same, that is 27002. This helps to differentiate the standards between themselves and to understand the benchmarking between them, and to understand some kind of weaknesses and some kind of strength that we have today between different compliance and different standards and different regulations. Standards may be open for interpretations, for example, providing some kind of guidelines, or it can be providing some kind of mandatory control requirements in sense of the rules. So PCI DSS is a good example of standard that is quite, let's say, mandatory, with mandatory control requirements. From the other hand, we will have ISO 27001 that it's, let's say, somehow open for interpretation. So in terms of scope, it's section number 4 on this slide here. So in terms of scope, standard may apply to an entire organization, specific business, specific processes, products, systems, and etc. So on the next slide, we can see aspects of security standards. So we will have 4 different domains that we will talk about. It will be purpose, it will be how standards should be implemented, it will be focal areas, and the benefits of the different standards. So now that we have covered already security standards in the sense of definition, what security standard is, let us understand what are the other additional dimensions that one standard might have. So why do we have security standards? That is the main and I think the most important question. So one of the strategic objectives of security standards is to achieve consistent, measurable, and comparable approach, as you can see here. So it will be like purpose. Approach to cybersecurity. So when I say measurable, consistent, and comparable approach, what actually that means? These terms, what I was using, what are the benefits from them? So consistent approach allows universal and uniform approach for managing security across the enterprise, across the organization. So this approach will be extendable to specific business units, location, products, and etc. When we say comparable and comparable approach is one that can be benchmarked against other dimensions, against different environments, different organizations, and different industries. So, for example, comparable cybersecurity approach will allow us to evaluate the security roadmaps of different verticals, different industries, such as, for example, procurement or finance or HR. We will be able to understand benchmarking across the same industry sector and etc. So when we say that need to be measurable and that we need to take measurable approach, it's mean that need to be driven by metrics. So this allows us to quantify various dimensions of the security approach, including efficiency of performance or return of investment or reduction in some kind of enterprise-wide security risk levels, impacts on number of incidents, time to detect, changes to organizational culture, and etc. So on the same slide, under the subdomain called focal areas here, so we need to understand what's mean focal areas when we are talking about standards. So standards can help us in building a governance framework for the enterprise. So one of the popular standards for governance is, for example, COBIT framework for IT governance and management. So another area that standard help others is risk management, for example, which is core area of the most popular cybersecurity or information security standards. However, we have focused standards on risk management, such as, for example, ISO 31000. So then we will have training and awareness and organization security culture that is also strongly stressed by standards such as ISO or PCI DSS and etc. So practically all these standards, they can provide guideline for drafting sort of security policies and procedures and processes. So the most important question is, now we gave definition of the standard, we talked about purpose, we talked about focal areas, now we need to understand who should implement this standard and why it's important to have implementation in place. So practically the answer is very broad, depends on a lot of external factors, depends on the nature of the organization itself. So however, in the Middle East region, standards are imposed upon regulated organizations such as, for instance, government entities or banking or any kind of financial organizations or telecom organizations. So this applies, I would say, as mandatory standard. So from the other side, from the other end, we will have a voluntary standard that must be adopted by organization, especially those such as who has some kind of critical information asset that they just cannot afford losing in any kind of security breach. So benefits of compliance, that is here on the same slide, the last item that we need to discuss. So benefits. So why benefits is important? Well, benefits of compliance with the standard, of course, that it has very important role in the market as a market reputation or optimization of security investments and cost, and the largest and most intangible benefit, which is the strength, the customer trust in the organization business practices. So practically, now we will go on the next slide, where we will try to do some kind of benchmarking. So we define standard, we mention how standard need to be implemented and why need to be implemented. We discuss purposes, we discuss different industries and the types of the standard that you might find today. So now, considering the fact that I mentioned two types of standards, mandatory and voluntary, now on this slide, you will see some kind of high-level landscape of information and cybersecurity standards across different sectors. We try to classify them into mandatory, as you can see here, and voluntary, that you can see here. So we also try to demonstrate some kind of geographical areas where we can find this kind of standards. So we start with the NISA, Information Assurance Standard. NISA compliance is mandatory standard for all UAE government entities and other entities identified as a critical national service by NISA. So NISA compliance will be applicable and will be mandatory for all other stakeholders who are supporting and dealing with any kind of critical national information or who is providing any kind of similar services. So for all other UAE entities, NISA recommends to follow the guidelines on a voluntary basis in order to participate in some kind of minimum security level. So in Dubai, for example, we have a standard called ISR. So it's second line, second row here. So ISR is information security regulations that is mandated for Dubai government entities. So while, for example, for information security standard from Abu Dhabi Systems and Information Center, we will have ISAC that is mandated for Abu Dhabi government entities that you can find here on the third row. So SAMA framework will be mandatory for financial and banking sectors in KSA. So I gave you like an overview of mandatory standards that we have here inside of this landscape. So on a global scale, we have PCI DSS, which is mandatory for any sector, but only if there is card holder data stored, processed, and transmitted by the organization. So only under these kind of conditions, PCI DSS will be mandatory for any sector. So now we are coming to one very interesting and now these days very popular standard called GDPR. So it's new data protection regulation that is applicable to any organization across the globe that offers goods or services targeting EU individuals who are in European Union or out abroad, working abroad. So practically this standard will somehow monitor the behavior of all European individuals. And well, it's important to mention that we can exclude any kind of government and energy sectors, but pretty much all the other sectors, including like finance, insurance, telecom, or e-commerce or whatever, which are targeting EU individuals, will have to comply with GDPR. And practically the deadline for compliance with GDPR is very soon. It will be on 25th of May. So it's very important to mention that fines for non-compliance can be as high as like 20 million of euros, or let's say in different measures, it like 4% of global annual turnover of organizations. So it's quite a lot. In terms of voluntary standards, so it will be here, this section that I'm showing here. So we have a few good samples, including critical infrastructure protection standard for North American energy companies. We will have 3GPP. It's a third generation partnership project for it's a telecommunication standard that provides their members, let's say, with a stable environment to produce the reports and specification that defines 3GPP technology. So then we will have NIST, so NIST cybersecurity framework, and ISO 27001. So NIST is a voluntary guidance. It's based on existing standards, existing guidelines and practices. It's for critical infrastructure organization to better manage and reduce any kind of cybersecurity risk. So it's clearly organized in different domains, into 4 different domains. It will be identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So ISO 27001, the last standard that we are seeing here on the slide. So it's one of the most popular information security standards in the world. It provides guidance on how to build and how to maintain information security management system. So ISO 27001 has 11 domains, has around 39 control objectives and more than like 130 plus controls. So it's touching different domains such as HR, such as physical security, such as network security, such as governance, and etc. So now we are having the section number 2. So after finalizing, let's say, some kind of general definitions regarding to the standard, understanding the benefits, understanding how can we implement, understanding the domains, types of the standard, and etc. Now we are coming to section 2, where we need to understand which kind of key controls areas we are having in any of security standards. So practically now that we received some kind of high-level view on the previous slide of cybersecurity standards and information security standards and regulatory landscape, now we will get into the actual contents of the standard. So we will talk again a little bit about ISO, PCI, NISA, NIST, and etc. But what we must remember is that all these standards are designed for different environments, and all these standards have a lot of common domains between themselves. So in this section, we will explore these key control areas across multiple standards. So we will try to understand these control areas in detail, why they are important for us, why any kind of regulations or compliance or any kind of international national standard have this kind of domains. And we will try to identify the tips and tricks to maximize our return on security investments made to implement, manage, or monitor this kind of control, common control areas. So practically the first key control area will be security governance. So I'm sure that we have heard already about the term governance at multiple points. So let us try to understand what actually, when we are saying governance or governance model or operating model, what actually means that one in security. So security governance is a framework that allows for senior management to express some kind of commitment to cybersecurity, define the security goals in alignment with the business strategic objectives, provisioning any kind of resource, manpower or tools or funds or etc. Needed to implement security, needed to define roles and responsibilities, identify any kind of metrics to verify the performance of the security activities. So all above mentioned will be communicated for different levels of the organization, usually for the policies, procedures, guidelines, some kind of trainings, baselines, and etc. So governance is mandated by multiple security standards, as we can notice on this slide. So on the top line, we will see ISO. So it's the first row. We will see ISO, we will see NIST, we will see NISA, Dubai, ISR standard, ISIC, and etc. So in all of these standards, information security governance is mandated. So it's mandated to create, implement, and maintain security governance framework. So we have specific framework that are focusing on governance, which can be referred for let's say implementing security governance. For example, one of them is COBIT. So COBIT is I believe that you already heard about COBIT, but COBIT is a model for IT governance. While, for example, COCO is a framework for corporate governance. So furthermore, we will have again ISO 27014 that provides guidance on the concept and principles for the governance of information security. So which any organization can monitor or evaluate or direct or communicate the information security related activities within the organization. So, however, the key aspect to keep in mind to maximize return of investment on security governance activities, I would summarize as follows. So practically the first one will be to ensure the security governance initiatives that are led by qualified personnel, because we need to have skilled people, we need to have qualified people in our organizations. So this is important to ensure that there isn't much some kind of leak of security governance. We need to make sure that our governance model is aligned with our business strategy and business objectives. And we need to have some kind of balance between different domains in organization. So we need to develop also like RSC matrix that may be implemented to ensure like who will be responsible, who will be accountable, who will be consulted or informed. So this one is a very important approach of security governance. So the correct use of metrics will go a long way in tracking the effectiveness of the governance framework. So we need to have some kind of let's say, performance KPIs that are like performance indicators that we will try to develop, tailored for our organization, and we will try to understand, we will try to track our effectiveness in the security governance framework. So the next slide that I would like to discuss on today's webinar will be practically the second control area, that is risk management. So now that we have achieved a good understanding and importance of security governance, operating model, let's say reporting lines, communication lines, any kind of resource allocation tools, or whatever is needed to have good security governance in the company. Now we need to understand what's mean risk management. So the concept of risk in the security management framework, it's like I would say that is first, this risk management is across all security standards. It's across ISO, PCI, NISA, or Dubai ISR, or ISAC standards. So risk management is just a process that immediately follows after risk assessment. So once the level of risk that is facing a business process or team or product or organization has been defined, then strategy need to be chosen to bring the risk to the level of acceptable risk. So we need to define, what is the risk acceptance level. We need to evaluate the risk, we need to analyze the risk. So all this one is defined within a risk management framework. So risk management has 4 options, namely to mitigate the risk by applying controls, avoid the risk by not engaging in the risk-causing activity itself, transfer the risk to a third party, for instance, or to accept the risk because it's already below the threshold value of the risk acceptance criteria. So implementing the risk management requires the adoption, first of all, of a formal risk assessment methodology. So we need to have in the company good and stable risk assessment methodology, risk assessment approach that will respect to do any kind of risk assessment. So for example, we have several, like it's ISO 27001 or NIST and etc. So before the initiation of the activity, risk acceptance criteria must be defined and approved by management. Because if the risk acceptance criteria is not approved by management, it means that it's not valid for any kind of further discussion. So we have several standards like ISO 31000 or Enterprise Risk Management Framework or NIST 837 that actually provides guidance on the correct implementation of risk management. So now, how can we maximize our efficiency and the return of investment on risk management efforts? So one of the tips is to avoid development of new methodologies altogether. So it's always better to use existing and testing methodologies that you already have in place, such as, for example, Enterprise Risk Management Framework or NIST 837 or ISO 31000. So also during the risk assessment activity, and that is quite complex activity, and it's tailored for any kind of industry and organizations. Some organizations prefer, for example, a hybrid approach. So when I say hybrid approach, it means one that includes both quantitative and qualitative assessment of the risk. So practically this approach, if implemented correctly, can bring in the best of both worlds. So the simplicity of the qualitative approach and the relative accuracy of the quantitative approach. So on the end, it may be, from my end, I would advise you to hire an external, for example, consultant or subject matter expert to execute the entire risk management activity. So the advantage is that external subject matter experts are not judgmental. So they will estimate all risk in your organization or company in very good way. So we will be aware of, they will be aware of any kind of internal workings or reviewing the environment. So, however, the downside is that they will take a few more days of effort to understand the current environment. So with reviewing entity, so might takes a few days more. So the other next slide that I would like to talk about will be regarding to key control area 3, called information or cybersecurity awareness. So educating the users on cybersecurity threats and their role in today's world is very important. So it's not surprise, therefore, that our key control area 3, information security awareness, is mandated across almost all information security standards, as you can see above. So we will have ISO, we will have PCI, NISA, Dubai, or ISAC, and etc. So factors such as the risk profile of the target audience, any kind of security incidents need to be taken into account. So accordingly, subjects like social engineering or phishing, endpoint security, and this, etc., must be included in any kind of awareness program plan and training. So the next step is to deliver the training. So we have different multiply methods, right, to deliver the training. We can use classroom, we can use any kind of webinars, we can use online trainings, we can use any kind of newsletter, any kind of distribution channel that will be attractive for our targeted audience. So, for example, also posters or banners and etc. So what is the most important thing on the end of any kind of awareness programming plan? It's feedback. So we need to understand what our audience think about us, what is takeaway message, and how they are thinking to work on some kind of continuous improvement methods. So the feedback is always the most important, let's say, mechanism on the end of awareness programming plan. So now we are coming back on the point that is important point for this presentation. It's return of investment. So how can we maximize return on this topic, on training investment? So one of the key criteria is to define, for example, training evaluation metrics that can be audience feedback, for example, or reduction in the number of security incidents that are detected, or increase in number of security incidents that are being reported, or improvement in the overall risk profile of a business unit, right? So once all these metrics are defined and used in correctly way, it will be easier to justify further budget for any kind of security, is it information or cybersecurity training. So another strategy is to make trainings more interactive and effective by stepping outside of the traditional classroom, for example, and e-learning mindset, and provide interactive simulations like a phishing campaign or gamification of the entire training. So these approaches are more effective in achieving the goals of changing employees' behavior and changing the culture in your organization and your company. So the key control area 4 will be security testing and vulnerability management. That is quite technical area. So The testing, so all security mechanism and features within a system will be to define the level of protection that we have in our environment. So security testing can include penetration testing, can include formal design and implementation, verification, and functional testing of the system. So when we say vulnerability management means some kind of cycling process of identifying, classifying, prioritizing, and remediating the system vulnerabilities. So security testing and vulnerability management, I would say that they are core component of any kind of security frameworks, and they are mandated in standards such as ISO 27001, PCI, NISA, Dubai, or ISAC. So what would be the strategy? The strategy would be to adopt any kind, let's say, offensive strategy to achieve a defense tactic, to protect the organization against cybersecurity attacks, to implement any kind of consistent and multiply steps, but they must ensure that all assets have been scoped in, that are tested, that a remediation plan is in place, and that implementation is on a timely basis. So for penetration testing, for example, it's recommended to adopt formal penetration testing methodology to provide assurance to internal and external stakeholders for the quality. So regarding to return of investment, when we are talking about this key control is let's say, key strategies to hire external subject matter experts to carry out this exercise. And secondly, I would say it would be developing any kind of testing approach, but consider the risk-based approach. So the fifth key control area would be incident management. So when we are saying the incident management, what actually that means? We need to have some kind of mechanism in place to detect, to investigate, to prioritize, contain, and recover from any kind of cyber or information security incident. So as we can see, this incident management, we can find it also across all these security standards. So implementing the control must begin with formal incident management policy, procedure, and process, setting up the team to respond to incident alerts and take appropriate action. So we need to resolve any kind of incident that we have in our company. Examples can be cybersecurity for SOC alerts, any kind of facilitated security team for physical security incidents, HR for personal security, and etc. When we are talking about return of investment, here we can mention a point, development of security-centric culture. So if you see something, say something. So the maximum number of incidents are brought into daylight, and managers they need to be aware of any kind of risk and incident in the company. And the second point that I would mention is, let's say, is adoption of relevant metrics across the entire incident management framework. So include time to detect an incident, time to recover from it, restore any kind of normal operation, number of repeating incidents to help and improve our efficiency and our steps to prevent incidents to happen again. So thank you so much to attend this webinar. Now I will try to understand if there is any question regarding to the topic that we discussed today. And please, Praveen, continue. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ariana. And it was a really, really insightful session. Guys, I hope you were able to learn from the concepts that Ariana discussed. We had a look at a variety of security standards and a very good oversight of the entire landscape of regulation. Plus, just to recap, Ariana had also given a very insightful session on how we can maximize our returns when we invest in actually complying with these security standards. All right, so with that background, guys, I would like to take about 5 minutes just to give you how, just to give you an idea of how ngram Micro, we can help you to achieve compliance with these standards. Like you are already aware, we represent the ngram Micro cybersecurity team, and what you see on your screen is something that might be familiar to you already, but I'd like to remind you again. We offer a whole suite of services in terms of cybersecurity as well as trainings. When we talk about security standards, like the one that Aryan, like the many ones that Ariana discussed, we need to take a risk-based approach. We need to talk about deploying a governance framework. We need to upscale our employees in terms of awareness and so on and so forth. We can actually help you and your end customers to implement these in real time, right? So there was a very interesting slide which you showed, Ariana, that talked about the regulatory landscape. What kind of sectors need to be compliant against standards against various regions. So to our business partners, I have this message. You have end customers, you know now that what the regulatory requirements are. We saw that the NISA information assurance standards is mandatory for government entities. We saw that Dubai ISR applies for Dubai-based government entities, and ATSIC ISS also applies. We also talked about GDPR and PCI DSS and ISO 27001 at length, right? So if you have end customers who need to be certified against these standards, you can see up here on the slide, we offer consultancy services. We can actually help these organizations through you, of course, through our most valued business partners. We can help these end customers in building their compliance framework. We can draft policies and procedures for them. We can do gap assessments, risk management, one of the areas that Ariana stressed. We can actually help you on that as well. And vulnerability management, we have a whole suite of solutions around technical assessments. The very first column that you see on the left of your screen, we have a free service called Public Discovery Report, which is step one of your security assessment when it comes to technical assessments. We can also conduct periodic vulnerability assessments, scheduled penetration tests, and also in terms of incident response, we can do forensic analysis and so on as well for your customers. All right, and there's also the managed security services, the very last piece of the pie. We offer SOC services, SOC as a service, 24/7, 8/5. However you want it, we have options that you can pick and choose from. So if you have end customers that need to meet regulatory compliance requirements, talk to us. We are the guys that can actually help them on and work with you, partner with you, and help the customers be on their way to compliance. All right. In terms of trainings, this is also another area that Ariana had specifically emphasized, and this is something that I'm very attached to because I'm directly managing the trainings aspect of ngram Micro cybersecurity portfolio. So we have trainings for all kinds of audiences, guys. So whether you're talking about end user awareness sessions for a customer, we have a whole suite of trainings which we call the foundational trainings on the left hand side of your slide. We have trainings which can be general awareness sessions, what we call the fundamentals of information security. We have CyberSafe, which is a certification training. So people who attend and take up a test, they get certified in CyberSafe. And then we have GDPR specific trainings as well. Now, GDPR, like Ariana rightly pointed out, comes into effect on the 25th of May, which is this week, right? So we just have a couple of days left. And organizations are gearing up left, right, and center to meet this regulation. Even here in the UAE, as well as across the world for that matter, any organization that is dealing with or EU-centric personal data that belongs to EU individuals, they will have to be compliant with GDPR. So we can actually help them to understand what the requirements are, what they need to do with GDPR. And we have specific GDPR implementation services as well, which is part of our consultancy suite. All right. For the cybersecurity team, we have CISSP, we have CASP, CompTIA, Network Plus, Security Plus, all the most popular cybersecurity certification trainings. And you are familiar with these trainings. I'm very sure you're familiar with these certifications. So go up onto our website. We have a training schedule that's put up on the website, security.ingrammicro.com. Feel free to schedule trainings or talk to your end customers. We can actually train them. We have a very beautiful training facility here in the DIC office on the second floor. So we can offer the facility as well if this is required. All right. And we have risk and compliance trainings, almost all of the standards that Ariana discussed, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, risk assessment standards like NIST, Octave, and ISO 27005. We have 2-day workshops on these. So if you have a security team of your end customer that needs to be trained on how they need to manage the risk internally within the organization, these are the trainings that they need to attend. All right. And I already emphasized GDPR, but I did not mention the importance of CIPP-E and CIPM. These are the two most relevant certifications that the data protection officer can hold. All right. DPO, or data protection officer, is a position that is mandated by GDPR. And the most important certifications that people should look out for when they are evaluating a resume for the DPO position, These are the two ones that you see up here on the slide, CIPPE and CIPM. Guys, these are 2-day trainings. Certified trainers are available within our team, and they can actually help deliver these trainings, help them to prepare for these exams as well. All right, guys, so that was a quick update on the service portfolio and how we can help you. We hope that was beneficial. I have a quick update on the activities as well. And before we complete this, let me remind you, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A window, and Ariana is available to take these questions. So feel free to shoot your questions away. Meantime, let me give you a quick update on the activities. As I mentioned, our website is security.ngrammicro.com. It is up and available with complete details on all our services, on all the services that we can do for you and how we can work together. Do feel free to check out our YouTube channel. It's called Ngram Micro Cybersecurity. All recordings of our webinars, previous webinars, sessions, talks, a lot of useful content is up there, artificial intelligence, GDPR, and so on. Follow us on our Twitter handle at Cybersecurity, and Jessica from the marketing team is really active on social. So a lot of timely updates on what we're up to and how you can be updated as well on cybersecurity. As plus our monthly newsletter, it's called Cyber Bites. You will be receiving it in your inboxes every month. This month's newsletter is due in a couple of weeks, so feel free to go through it. A lot of useful information there as well. In terms of events, we successfully conducted, in partnership with ForcePoint, a launch event in UAE as well as Qatar. In case you are not aware, we now officially distribute ForcePoint as well in select regions. We had a very, very overwhelming participation for these two events, guys, and it really took us. It was a lot of encouragement for us as well. Showed us about the volume of interest in ForcePoint specific solutions in the market. Let me also tell you about the South Africa event, the last bullet point that you see. There's a partner event that we are hosting on June 19th in South Africa, Johannesburg to be precise. You will receive invites for this, and feel free to join us as well for this event. It's going to be extremely informative on all our vendors that we distribute, cybersecurity vendors that we distribute in South Africa. The third bullet point is about the public discovery report. I just wanted to touch base on this as well. Like I said, PDR is a starting point for any security conversation that you can have with your end customers, right? So we usually call it the icebreaker because it helps you to get the conversation started. It's a free service. What we do is we look for publicly discoverable information about the customer on publicly accessible sources, right? And we put this into a neat, 4-page document and share it with you. You can go to the customer and approach them and tell them, guys, we are able to find this public information, publicly accessible information, but this is sensitive data. It's not supposed to be out there. And from here, we can talk about what other problems a customer might be facing and how we can actually help them to address these. And like we work only through our partners, so you would have to be directing us in terms of the conversations with the end customers, but we will always be there to bring in the cybersecurity expertise. A quick snapshot of the vendors that we distribute, and this is a growing list, guys. I mean, almost every month we are adding vendors. So if you have any requirements in terms of the ones that you see up here, feel free to get in touch with us. And that's a quick snapshot of the team as well. Like the vendor portfolio, the team size as well is increasing, which is very, very positive for us. Ariana is up on the top right, and she was a primary speaker for us today. Mr. Mark heads the team, the director on the top left, and everybody else that you see up, our email IDs are available. Feel free to get in touch with us for your queries. Perfect, guys. So we've come to the end of the session. We have 6 minutes left on the clock. If you have any questions, feel free to chat them out. Dr. Ariana is available to answer them. We have one question. And this says, what is the best approach to comply with a given security standard? Dr. Ariana, best approach.
Best approach, is it regarding to information security standard or cyber? To comply with
just
any
security standard.
Okay, so the best approach to comply with any security standard, first need to be done some kind of gap analysis. You need to understand what is in the company, in client environment. So it will be like current state assessment, let's say, to understand what we have and what we don't have. The basic domains that we need and that we should cover, it will be, of course, in the first place, security governance, because its operating model, we need to understand who is reporting to who, where the resources are allocated, what is happening with the budget, who is, is it information technology and information security team? Are they one team, or they are to whom they are reporting? Is it like CIO, or reporting lines are different? So all this one is important because of the initiatives and because of the budget. So the first will be security governance. The second one that you need to consider will be definitely risk assessment, because you need to understand what are the critical information, what are the critical system application is in the application that you have in the current environment. So you need to understand what are the things that the people in the different departments seem as sensitive. So if you are talking with IT, we will have IT risk assessment. We will talk about system processes, application, the place. If you are talking about critical information, then we are talking about business units and department that they will have. We will do some kind of business impact assessment where, based on confidentiality, integrity, availability of data, we will understand how much is important that information for the organization, and we will try to apply security controls from any of security standard. Is it NIST or it's ISO or it's NIST or any kind of security controls. The third domain that is very important domain, it would be definitely penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, because if we have any kind of weaknesses or vulnerabilities in our systems, then all our information that are stored somewhere there will become vulnerable. So we need to protect them. So to protect them, we need to do some kind of quarterly basis, quarterly or let's say every 6 months, we should do penetration testing and vulnerability assessment across all our environment. Well, I was mentioning before incident management, and I'm still standing behind that one. It's a really important domain, because if we don't have any kind of monitoring tool in place, we will not be able to discover any kind of security alerts, and we will not be able to understand what is happening now. So definitely, I would say incident management, we need to comply with that one. These are just domain that are counting like a titles, but if you will take, for example, ISO 27001, or 002, that is implementation of these security controls, you will find a lot of subdomains. So practically, if you are talking about governance or incident management, we'll find other 6, 7, 8 sub-controls under that domain. So we will comply with the certain controls that are tailored for our environment. Doesn't mean that we need to be compliant with any single sub-controls in, for example, within ISO. So ISO is something that you can interpret, and it can be based on requirements of the company. So ISO will have some kind of mandatory controls and let's say some kind of baseline requirements that need to be accomplished. So you need to comply with that one. What is very, very important, and what I would say that is like really the most important chain. So it's training and awareness. So imagine even if you have some kind of super protected technology, even if you have some kind of BitLocker on laptop, or even if everything is like working perfectly, but if your behavior as a human, if you don't respect the policies, procedures, and guidelines, and if you are not aware of things that is happening today in all external and internal threat landscape, then a human and you are becoming the weakest point in our chain. Because imagine if I have some super some kind of protection software, encryption software on my laptop, but what that one means for me, if I will just leave everything open and I will not lock out my laptop and I will just go, I will stand up for 5 minutes. So all this technology that is not even cost-effective technology, but it's very expensive solution, this encryption solution, BitLocker or whatever, doesn't mean anything for me anymore if my behavior was completely different of expected behavior that I should have. So the human are the weakest point in our chain, and to provide them any kind of awareness trainings and awareness session is really important. So I would say that this was the best way to do the best approach to comply with any of standards. So I will not say that ISO is the better than NISA or NIST or whatever. Every standard has their own value. It's important to satisfy baseline requirements that every standard has. For example, NISA, we will have P1 that are minimum requirements that you need to be compliant with. So practically just focus yourself on these 5 domains that we talked about, and that let's say that one would be the best approach for return on investment also.
Thank you, Dr. Ariana. And guys, just to remind you, Ngram Micro Cybersecurity, we can actually help you as well on these on all the areas that Dr. Ariana discussed. All right, there's another question from Joe El Husseini, who's asking us, what is the best approach to use a national level standard if the government has not made an initiative? Thank you, Joe.
Okay. So regarding to national standards and government entities, well, if you are speaking about, for example, NISA, that is for UAE, right? So we cannot mandate any organization to put in place some kind of and to respect any kind of standards. So practically, it's need to come and need to be approved from executive management for the C-levels. So what would be the best approach? For example, for NISA, they have P1 minimum requirements, right, that need to be respected. So in these minimum requirements, you will have all these domains that we were talking about. So like governance, risk management, incident, training and awareness, and etc. So best approach for me would be to do some kind of risk assessment, to break down, to understand risk acceptance level, to evaluate and analyze the risks, to understand what is critical, what is high, medium, or low, to pull out all, for example, high and critical risk that you have there in your company, in government entity, and to try to report, to present to C-level in some kind of, let's say, fancy way, providing him business justification and providing him all threats and vulnerabilities that might happen after the risk issue. So that one might be approached for the C-level to explain them why they need to put, for example, NISA or any other standard in place and why need to be mandatory, at least P1 level, that is like baseline requirements. So I would say that one would be definitely the best approach, because they need to understand the issues, they need to understand what's mean risk, they need to understand what can happen in the case if we are not covered from that point of view. For example, you can give them some kind of samples, like what happened like Aramco or like I think 2 years ago. So the risk that was basically for them, it was low. It was in that risk acceptance criteria low. Actually, that risk caused a lot of damage, not just reputational damage, but also damage, for example, financial damage, operational damage, any kind of business disruption, and etc. So definitely, I would start from risk assessment and critical and high levels, providing them business justification, and continue and to convince them why we need to have in place all policies, all procedures, P1 requirements from the NISA, for example, guidelines. Yeah. So okay. So I just saw the question from Joe. Actually, he was speaking about Lebanon. So from Lebanon, from the Lebanon to be. Now I'm thinking what can be interesting for Lebanon. You can do ISO. So I will go with ISO 27001-002. So practically take the minimum requirements that ISO international standards is requiring, and try to do similar approach that I already mentioned. Try to do from the risk assessment and try to convince executive management, C-level, that really which kind of threats and which kind of landscape and external issues that might cause reputational, financial, and well, financial damage and business disruption in your company. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aryan, and thank you guys for your questions as well. We don't see any further questions, so let me take a second to thank you for your attendance, and really appreciate the time that you've given us. Let me reiterate that we look forward to working with you, and feel free to get in touch with us for any of your cybersecurity queries or questions. More than happy to collaborate. Thank you guys, and have a great afternoon as well. Thank you.